Hello, welcome to your Kaplan lesson about CARS passages and the structure and strategy that you'll use to be able to get through them quickly and efficiently and get you points on test day. In this lesson, we're going to cover how to take a CARS passage and utilize the Kaplan strategy on it. So we'll first cover this Kaplan passage strategy, and then we'll show you a CARS passage and have you use that strategy on the CARS passage. And just as a preview, it is one of the most unusual and exciting passages that we really are going to see in this whole course, so get excited. We all love this passage, and I think you're going to love it too. So let's take a look at the Kaplan method for CARS passages. You've got 4 steps, and we're going to cover all the steps fairly quickly because we're going to get a lot of practice with them later in the lesson. So the first thing you want to do in any given CARS passage is to scan the passage for a structure. And the point there is you want to decide whether you're going to read the passage now or attempt it later. You want to read the passages now when they're easier, and we'll show you how to recognize an easier passage. We want you to read passages and work on them later when it's a more difficult passage. And the reason for this is actually something we call triaging. You've probably heard of this in a medical setting where when several patients come in, the patient that needs attention first is the one that is in the most dire condition. Well, in the case of passages on the MCAT, the passage that's in the most dire condition, the one that needs you the most, is the easier passages because those are going to score you the most points. Once you decide to do a passage now, you're going to read it strategically, and we'll show you a way to look at things like keywords and connections to get through the passage quickly and efficiently. We'll have you label each component, which basically means to write a brief description down on the scratch paper that you'll be provided with on test day. And then at the end, you want to think about what you just read, overall reflect on the passage, and then write the author's goal, because a lot of questions on the MCAT are about the author's goal, and if you understand it, you'll get points. So let's take a look at how this scan step works and how it starts to get you those points that you need on the test. So there's 2 big aspects to the scan step. First of all, you want to figure out what type of passage you're looking at, and then you want to decide how easy the passage is. So the different types of passages are humanities and the social sciences, and you can see the list of examples of each of the 2 types of passages there in your book. The idea here is you want to decide which one's easier for you. The humanities passages, if you like to read about dance, ethics, literature, philosophy, and so on and so forth, or if you prefer to read about social sciences, cultural studies, education, economics, linguistics, psychology. You make the decision on which one you like more, which one is easier for you, and those are the passages you'll do first, leaving the other types of passages for later in the test. There's more to this triaging decision though. Let's take a look at the actual triage part of it, and that's going to be when you do a quick look at usually just the first paragraph of any given CARS passage and decide really quick, does it look like something easy to handle or does it look like something more difficult? So in your lesson book, you're going to want to write down 2 things here. 1, the passage type in each of these 3 examples that you see on the page, which you can just write under each passage on this page. And then 2, your actual triage decision, which we're going to see coming up. We'll make decisions here in this session that may not be necessarily what you would agree with, but at least you can see the logic about why you might want to triage a passage a certain way or not. So let's take a look at this first passage excerpt here. It's about W.H. Auden, reputation, and it says a bunch of different things. We've got some interesting vocabulary here, nadir, posthumous, but beyond the slightly interesting vocabulary, we're seeing pretty straightforward sentence structure. Now, you may not have seen many CARS passages yet, but in the grand scheme of things, this one isn't that bad. Just wait till you see some of the other ones on this page. Put that all together with the fact that it's a humanities passage, and you might be able to make the decision that this is a slightly easier passage. Now, even though this is an example of a fairly easy passage in terms of how difficult passages are in the MCAT, realize that there's not really going to be escape from difficult words on the MCAT. There's just a lot of high-level vocabulary in the CARS section passages. And so it really highlights the importance of now getting practice seeing these high-level vocabulary words. So definitely try to get that practice as you start working in these CARS passages, and you'll be able to get used to that higher-level vocabulary, start to be able to work through these passages better, and what we really are excited about is that'll get you points on your MCAT. Now let's take a look at another one. I've got a simple notion about Congress. So we're thinking social science passage here because it's not necessarily about art or humanities. It's about government. That tends to fall under the category of social sciences. So you might think, I love social sciences or I dislike social sciences and start making your triage decision there. Then we're going to move through more of it. We see it's about fiscal policy. We're talking about different mechanisms to determine fiscal policy. And a lot of times we see students' eyes cloud over and realize that they think this is a little bit of a boring passage, one that's going to be hard to stay focused in, maybe just because financial policy making isn't their favorite thing. So we're going to say, because of the possibly difficult sentence structure and the possible kind of boring and not that common nature of the topic, this would be a passage you could triage for later once you're well into the swing of the test and you know you've gotten your easy points out of the way. Come back and get through this passage about fiscal policy. Let's try one more example here. In this one, we've got realism in literature. So we're thinking literature, that's probably a humanities passage. And then we see that there's writing about realism in literature. So it's analyzing the idea of realism in literature. That's many levels deep. It looks like the sentence structure is a little bit more difficult too. So a lot of students might say that this is a passage that you should do later, harder subject matter and more difficult words that could possibly be coming up in this particular passage. As a reminder, I just want to make it very clear that this is not necessarily the decisions you would have made, but if you are making a triage decision at all, if you have that logic, that reason why you chose to do a passage earlier because it's easier or a passage later because it's harder, you will have what you need to triage well on test day. Practice triaging right now every time that you do a practice CARS passage. Now we're going to take a look at the read step of the Kaplan method and how to use it to get you points on test day. You want to get through the passages quickly and efficiently while still getting in your head the main idea of the passages. So a great way to do that is using keywords. Keywords are found all over the passages and you use them to find the most important parts of the passages. You find the most important parts of the passages because those are what the questions are about. And when you get these questions right, you get points on the MCAT, and that's kind of the whole point of all of this. So we're going to look at these different types of keywords. And the first set of them are relation keywords. These relate two concepts in a particular paragraph to one another, either by difference or similarity. And note that there's a deeper and longer explanation of these types of keywords along with the rest of the ones we're going to cover in this session in your review books. So let's take a look at difference keywords first, and we're seeing a little excerpt of a passage right here where we're going to find some different keywords. So if you take a look at the passage, we're going to look for some different keywords. The first difference keyword we see is while not entirely rejecting the theme of political insecurity, it says our subject here manifested different concerns. So we actually have two difference keywords there. They tell us that at some point something was happening and then it changed. So it signified some kind of change, and there are a lot of MCAT questions that cover things changing in passages, and sometimes they're hard to find, but when you use these difference keywords, they are easier to find and they're more highlighted, and it'll help you remember and be able to work through the author's meaning about what's changing. So continue reading after the word different there and find another difference keyword. If you're looking at the word although, you're correct. Although means you're going to be reading about something that did happen and then it will change. So if you see although, you know another change is coming, and it's a change that's highly likely to be in one of your questions. Other difference keywords that you might see in MCAT CARS passages are listed on your screen here. Now let's go over and talk about similarity keywords. Similarity keywords do the opposite of different keywords. They actually clue you in that some kind of idea is going to keep going. They're a good keyword to find because it means that whatever is coming is just more of the same. It's a great place to read faster because you know that information, since you've already read about it, is not likely to have changed. There's not a new idea that you're looking for. And so similarity keywords are, again, to clue you in, to read faster, and not have to pay quite as close attention as you do when there's difference keywords. So if you look at the second paragraph on the left side of your screen, we see the word and is a similarity type keyword. We know that less grand and more discursive are similar ideas about Auden's writing style. Take a look at the second sentence in the second paragraph and see if you can find another similarity keyword. If you're looking at the word also, you figured it out. This manner also accommodates his new thematic interests. So all of this paragraph here is just about the same new manner that Auden is writing in. Again, you see a list of similarity keywords appearing on the lower corner of your screen. So those are relation keywords. Let's now take a look at author keywords. Author keywords are ways that you can have insight into what the author was thinking and the author's intent. The first type of author keywords are positive versus negative keywords, and we'll see both in this very first sentence here on your screen. Often called dry and prosaic, Auden's mature style is an appropriate vehicle for his later concerns. Often called dry and prosaic is a keyword group there that's going to be negative. Dry, prosaic, these are negative words, and it tells us the author's intent to realize that somebody thought Auden's writing was not particularly good. However, we also have positive keywords in here. We can see the word mature and appropriate are the author's way of saying Auden's poetry is actually just fine, just great, it's mature, it's appropriate, so we know that the author thinks that Auden's poetry is positive, is a good thing. Here's some examples of positive keywords like genius, succeed, compelling, impressive, and then there's some negative ones as well. Disaster, fail, problematic, questionably. There's other author keywords, there's extreme keywords, and we can see in the second sentence on your screen here that there are several extreme author keywords. Now, extreme keywords show you that the author thinks something is particularly important. So anything that says it's the greatest or the worst type of thing, words at the extreme end of spectra, are what we mean when we say extreme keywords. And actually another extreme keyword is found here in the sentence, the word should, that's just being highlighted on your screen. Should means the author not only has judged something as good, but also thinks that it's so great that everybody else should like it, or the author has judged that something is so worth it that it should be done by others. In this sentence, the author is saying critics should view Auden's later style as good, and so anytime the author makes a judgment and applies that judgment to somebody else, that's actually an extreme word as well, because it's probably going to be tested when the author's that clear about what he or she actually thinks. Look through the rest of that sentence and see if you can find the second extreme keyword. If you're looking at the word best, you've got it right. That is the keyword there. The author is making a judgment and explaining it in the passage, and that's a place where you're going to see questions coming from. Some examples of extreme keywords are also indeed, very, really, quite, and primarily. Finally, in the set of author keywords, we get moderating keywords, and these are kind of the opposite of extreme keywords. They take something that the author said and kind of back it off a little bit, make it not quite as at the extreme ends, but more in the middle. And for doing an MCAT passage, that means that this point is not as strong as, say, an extreme point, and therefore it's slightly less likely to be asked about, unless it has some major impact on the author's argument as a whole. Looking at the sentence here, some is a keyword that we can say is moderating. It's not all, it's not none, it's just some, it's in the middle, and so this is kind of a minor point. Look at the rest of the sentence and see if you can find the other moderating keyword in there. If you're looking at the word might, you've got it correct. This is another word that takes something that could be said to be all the time or none of the time and change it to just some of the time that it might be viewed as one from a society to the self. Other examples of moderating keywords are can, could, may, and might, like we saw before. Finally, we get to logic keywords. Logic keywords are when the author is making a particular argument, and we'll talk more about arguments in the next lesson in this session. The logic keywords tell you what the author thinks or wants to describe as a main conclusion of a particular passage, and then the evidence keywords tell you why and for what reason the author brought that conclusion up. These are really helpful keywords to find because lots of MCAT questions ask about what the author did conclude, the author's main points or purposes, and then why the author could make that conclusion, what evidence that he or she gave to get to that conclusion. So when you see these, you've got to really get excited about them because they're going to get you points in the questions to come. So looking at this first paragraph on your screen, we see because and since are our evidence keywords. Because is going to tell us a reason why some conclusion could be arrived at. Since is going to tell us a reason as well. Some other examples of evidence keywords are because, since, like we saw in the passage, if, why, and the reason is. Now, conclusion keywords tell us the author's main purpose in a given paragraph, and an example of a conclusion keyword looking through that passage on your screen there is therefore. Pretty standard conclusion keywords. Some other examples of conclusion keywords are thus, then, so, and consequently. So evidence and conclusion keywords are definitely there to help you get points on the test because they tell you what the author thinks and why. Now, sometimes the author wants to give you a conclusion and then actually disagree with it. In this case, you can find these often because they're next to refutation keywords. Refutation keywords are where the author is going to disagree with an argument. Looking through the second paragraph on your screen there, calls into question is a refutation keyword group where the author is saying, here's something that I disagree with. And then you can see after that keyword, the author gives a bunch of reasons about why he or she disagrees with a certain conclusion. Other examples of refutation keywords are despite, notwithstanding, challenge, and object. Now that you've seen keywords, you're ready to jump into the label and reflect steps, and we're going to do this by using a passage to practice labeling and reflecting and making an outline. Labeling consists of writing a brief note to yourself about every single paragraph that you read in a passage. Reflect is where you think about the author's main goal in writing that passage and write that goal in your passage outline as well. Now, if you look on the page next to the passage, you're going to see a template for writing an outline like this, and then you'll also see below it a place for you to write your outline. We're going to fill this in together as we go through this passage. And what a passage it is! This is one of our favorite passages here at Kaplan. It has an unusual topic, it's very interesting, and it's a great one to start off learning how to label and reflect. Remember that you would have done a scan step before you started reading this passage. When you look at this passage, you might realize it is a slightly easier passage as far as passages go on the MCAT. Yes, there are still words that are higher level in vocabulary, but the sentences are straightforward in terms of syntax, and some of the sentences are even short. When you're scanning, this might be a passage you would consider doing now rather than later. So let's go ahead and do this passage now. I'll read the passage out loud. You'll want to read along with me, looking for keywords. It starts off. Those who consider the devil to be a partisan of evil and angels to be warrior of good accept the demagogy of the angels. Things are clearly more complicated. Now, pause for just a moment and realize the author has just given us a major keyword. Clearly more complicated. This is an extreme keyword, and it tells us that this is a point that the author thinks is important. What that means is there's likely going to be questions that go along with this passage that are about the complicated nature of devils being evil and angels being good. Now let's see what this complication entails. Going back to the passage, it says, angels are partisans not of good, but of divine creation. The devil, on the other hand, denies all rational meaning to God's world. We see two difference keywords in the second half of the sentence. So we're getting this big difference from the way that the devil and angels are traditionally viewed. And this difference is that angels are not necessarily good, but have more to do with creation. The devil isn't necessarily evil, but more along the lines of anti-rational. So, hey, maybe you don't understand what this means yet, maybe you do, but as long as you're getting keywords and seeing connections between parts of sentences related by keywords, you're getting what you need to get out of this paragraph. Now, getting what you need to get out of this paragraph is what you want to do to be able to make your outline. So let's go ahead and label this paragraph. Go over to the blank space on the next page where you're going to be creating your own outline, and you can fill something along the lines of this in for your first paragraph. Angels are about creation, the devil is anti-rational. Then you're ready to move on to paragraph 2. It says, world domination, as everyone knows, is divided between demons and angels, but the good of the world does not require the latter to gain precedence over the former, as I thought when I was young. Let's stop for a moment here. We get another great difference keyword here with this word but, and we're realizing that the thing before the word but, that world domination is divided between demons and angels, has something different going on with it. And it looks like the difference that's going on with it is that the latter, the angels, don't have to gain precedence or don't have to win over the former, or the demons. So let's see what the author means by that. The paragraph reads, all it needs is a certain equilibrium of power. Now this word equilibrium is that word that we're looking for. It explains the difference that we knew was coming because we saw the difference keyword. The author further goes on to say, if there is too much uncontested meaning on earth, the reign of the angels, man collapses under the burden. If the world loses all its meaning, the reign of the demons, life is every bit as impossible. So that last sentence says we need equilibrium between the demons and the angels. This is about what you want to write in your outline. You need some kind of balance between angels and the devil or angels and demons. Like I said, this is quite an unusual topic for a passage, but again, it's fairly interesting. So let's keep going on to the third paragraph. The author writes, things deprived suddenly of their putative meaning, the place assigned to them the insensible order of things, makes us laugh. Now let's pause for a moment here. Laughing is not what this passage seemed to be about yet. This passage was about the devil, the angels, demons, and they're fighting each other, and then we need an equilibrium of power. However, now we've got this new thought, this new idea of laughter. When you see these new ideas introduced, it's a good clue that you might see more questions about them coming up later. It's something that you don't want to miss. So when you're reading, you always want to be thinking about what the author's point is. It looks now like part of the point, at least, is about laughter. Let's keep reading. Initially, therefore, laughter is the province of the devil. We're going to stop again really quick and realize we've got a conclusion keyword here. Therefore, laughter is the province of the devil. We've got a conclusion. that the author has made. And now the author has tied laughter to the previous topic of the devil and angels. And we get our connection that we're looking for. The devil laughed first, laughed initially. Let's keep reading. Who knows what it means to be abruptly stripped of rank? He could not help guffaw after being cast from the heavens and plunging into the bowels of the earth. This laughter has a certain malice to it. Things have turned out differently from the way they tried to seem, but a certain beneficent relief as well. Things are looser than they seemed. We have a greater latitude in living with them. Their gravity does not oppress us. Okay, so we've got the paragraph that introduces laughter, and it is about the devil. This is actually where we get the name that we call this passage at Kaplan. We call it the Devil's Laughter passage, and this paragraph is where we get that name from. Another note about this paragraph, and it's actually kind of all over the whole passage, there's a lot of parenthetical notes in this passage. That just happens to be this way on this particular passage. Not every passage is like that on the MCAT. So let's continue with our outline here. In paragraph 3, you want to write down something about the devil's laughter, the fact that the devil laughed first, and that it was that loss of meaning. All right, so now it seems as though we're reading a passage about angels, demons or the devil, and laughter. Let's see where this goes. The author writes, the first time an angel heard the devil's laughter, he was horrified. It was in the middle of a feast with a lot of people around, and one after one they all joined the devil's laughter. It was terribly contagious. The angel was all too aware that the laughter was aimed against God and the wonder of his works. He knew he had to act fast, but felt weak and defenseless. And unable to fabricate anything of his own, he simply turned his enemy's tactics against him. He opened his mouth and let out a wobbly, breathy sound in the upper reaches of his vocal register and endowed it with the opposite meaning. We're going to pause for a moment here and realize we've got a great difference keyword in the word opposite here. We already know the devil laughed first, laughed at the loss of meaning of something, and now our angel is laughing back, almost to kind of combat or fight the devil, and we're putting an opposite meaning here. So we can even just predict that the meaning would be where something gains meaning. And we can continue reading and realize that we're pretty correct about what the angel's laughter signifies. It says, whereas the devil's laughter pointed up the meaningless of things, the angel's shout rejoiced in how rationally organized, well-conceived, beautiful, good, and sensible everything on earth was. So the devil laughs at the loss of meaning, and the angel laughs at how wonderfully full of meaning and great everything is. This kind of laughter where you have to laugh how wonderfully something turned out is a laughter that we hope you can have as you go take your MCAT. When you come out of the building, you can just laugh at how great that experience of taking the MCAT just was. So let's make our outline here for paragraph 4. So for the label for paragraph 4, you want to put something about how the angel uses laughter to kind of fight the devil. All right, moving on to paragraph 5, we see a pretty short paragraph, and we're going to try to figure out what in this paragraph needs to be written about in our outline. It's an interesting story, this paragraph. It says, there they stood, devil and angel, face to face, mouths open, both making more or less the same sound, but each expressing himself in a unique timbre, absolute opposites. And seeing the laughing angel, the devil laughed all the harder, all the louder, and all the more openly, because the laughing angel was infinitely laughable. What a strange topic here, a devil and an angel sitting there laughing at each other. It's quite the mental image. However, it does tell us really nothing new. The angel's still laughing. The devil's still laughing. The devil's laughing at the angel, and the angel is continuing to laugh. It's just more and more laughter. There's not actually too much new going on in this paragraph. So when you make your outline for it, you can just put something about the laughter continues, more laughter. Finally, let's move on to the last paragraph, paragraph 6. We get more about laughter here. It says, laughable laughter is cataclysmic, and even so the angels have gained something by it. They've tricked us all with their semantic hoax. Their imitation laughter and its original, the devil's, have the same name. Now let's pause for a moment here. The author is saying something about naming a word, the word laughter itself. So we're getting to the heart of the author's purpose in this passage here, that it's actually about the word laughter. Now we'll continue on here. People nowadays do not even realize that one and the same external phenomenon embraces two completely contradictory internal attitudes. There are two kinds of laughter, and we lack the words to distinguish them. So now, and this is just wonderful that we've gotten to it, the author's point is showing here. It's wonderful that we've gotten to it because the author's point will get you points when you answer questions correctly about it on the test. This is why we like to get to the author's point and really understand what the author is trying to say. Going into your label for paragraph 6, you want to write something along the lines of what the author's main point is. Laughter has two meanings, at least two meanings that the author has told us about. There's the laughter at the loss of meaning or the twisting of meaning, that's the devil's laughter. And there's the angel's laughter that combats that particular type of laughter, and it's laughing about how glorious and wonderful and meaningful things are. Therefore, laughter is ambiguous, and that's what the author is trying to say in this paragraph. And when you sit back and reflect on the passage as a whole, you'll realize that this last paragraph was really the author's main point all along. Yes, we had to hear an interesting and unusual story about the laughter and where it originated from, and the fact that it's sometimes to do with the devil, sometimes to do with angels. But overall, this odd story told us something about laughter itself, that it's ambiguous. The term is not necessarily straightforward in its meaning. Therefore, the goal of your passage here should be something along the lines of to argue that the word laughter is ambiguous. It's really just paragraph 6 and then the verb argue, because this is a passage where the author sets forth a conclusion and uses evidence to back it up, which we'll call a logical argument. Just a quick note here, all goals aren't just a rephrasing of the last paragraph, it just happens to be that way with this particular passage, but other passages, in fact most other passages, the goal will be a much larger statement on the passage overall. So now you've created your very own outline of a passage. Remember, these outlines help you key in to the most important information in the passage, and finding that most important information is good because it's going to be in the questions, and if you understand the questions, you get yourself points on the test. Flipping the page, you're going to see 3 different sample outlines of this passage about the devil's laughter. Basically, the point is, as long as the outline makes sense to you and it's getting at the author's main point, then you're moving towards the goal of how to make a good outline. So sample outline 1 we can see is very similar to the outline that you wrote down in your book. However, it's a bit long. This outline represents just about the maximum length that you'd ever want to make as an outline for a passage. The reason behind this is you just don't have tons of time on the test and you want to make the outline short and to the point, but still making sure they encompass everything that you need for your passage outline. If you take a look at sample outline 2, it's actually just the same outline as sample 1, but quite shortened. There's a lot of abbreviations going on, some of the little words are left out, and this is a little bit more of what you want to shoot for on test day, to be able to get at a short, to the point passage outline. Finally, if you take a look at sample outline 3, it's just, again, another different look at a way that this particular passage could be outlined. So for instance, you may not have written the words laugh off for paragraph 5, but that's okay. Whatever you get, as long as it's close to what the author means and gets you what you need to know out of that, it can get you the points that you need to get on the MCAT. One major thing that these 3 passage outlines have in common is that each of their goals begins with a verb. In this case, in sample outline 3, it begins with the word assert. In sample outlines 1 and 2, we see the word argue being used. Other examples of good goal words are show, or explain, or outline, or define. You want to use one of these goal words because the author will always have a goal or a main purpose for writing a passage, and you want to be able to find that goal in order to be able to answer questions about it and get the points that you want on the test. So therefore, use a verb at the beginning of any given goal that you're writing for a passage outline. Congratulations! Now you've seen the Kaplan method for CARS passages in its entirety, and you're going to be able now to take that and practice with it a whole lot and be able to start internalizing these methods, which is going to get you to a place where you can score more points on test day, and that's what we are really here for. As a review, you can see in your lesson book and on the screen here, we've got the method listed out, so go ahead and take a quick look over this method again. Remember that we scan, read, label, and reflect every time we see one of these CARS passages, and start practicing this every day, and you're going to get better at it. Great job completing this lesson. Keep up the great work as you practice your CARS passages.